ADHD, dyslexia, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I'm also happy to say that I am the father of 3 boys. They all have some form of autism, and the younger 2 also have ADHD. And I'm here to teach you that you can have all your challenges and succeed anyway. And I call this series Succeed with ADHD Anyway. So let's jump in. I receive a number of email requests, as you can imagine, and they ask a lot about the inconsistent school performance they see in their kids with challenges, as well as issues transitioning back to school after extended breaks, summer break, winter break. There are so many things to consider, but for now, let's focus on the specifics of the subjects of the emails I've been receiving recently. Sound good? The clients that I work with as a parent and life coach for people on the ADHD and autism spectrum, they are either grade school aged or high school or college. And the grade school age kids typically begin the school year strong, only to see a decline in academic performance overall toward the end of the first quarter or first semester. Does this sound familiar? As well as a decline in their ability to manage themselves and the task of their everyday responsibilities. The common thread amongst them is that they're maintaining their mental organization and meeting the expectations of the school environment through sheer force of will. I found out this is how I was able to do it. My grades were up and down as the school year went. And kids often put themselves through this for 2 main reasons. The first one is to avoid the need for accommodation. They think if they get help, they're going to stand out, and not in a good way. They're afraid people are going to point and gossip and criticize and judge. And they don't want to appear different from their peers, so they simply opt out of help. The second reason is to avoid the criticism of teachers and parents, which they experience in abundance otherwise. Criticism such as, you're not trying hard enough, how come you're not more motivated, don't you care about your grades? And they don't realize just how hard their kids are working. What ends up happening is that they progressively become mentally exhausted to the point where willpower alone simply can't do it anymore. The result is that they lose the ability to stay mentally organized and are unable to recover because the demands don't decrease and, in fact, tend to increase by the time they begin wearing out. And it doesn't have to take a whole semester or quarter. You can see this in the course of a week. A kid that seems totally on fire one day and the next day can't remember to take their pencil out. It's that, if anything, is an indication of how much energy that child put into the day before and now doesn't have anything left for the day after. It's making sense? These children who often begin the year liking school, as long as they're able to meet expectations and, of course, thus avoiding criticism, now find maintaining those expectations an increasing source of frustration and exhaustion. When winter break hits, it gives these kids a much-needed break from having to problem solve, memorize, organize, people please, and otherwise perform for others, often at their own expense. The realization of having to return to that environment that causes them so much mental anguish and exhaustion, and also begins to be seen as more of a source of problems instead of solutions. No wonder our kids get upset. No wonder they throw fits. No wonder they say they don't want to go back to school, because what they see it as is a source of pain instead of pleasure. And you might see them acting out more, becoming more isolated, becoming depressed. And when you think about it, there's a darn good reason for it. But we'll get into what to do about this. Just please remember that it's not that your child isn't motivated. It's that they are motivated to protect themselves from this perceived harm. Now, some of these kiddos make it through the primary grades completely undetected. They're so smart, savvy, and resourceful until they finally reach college. And that's when they experience some of these issues for the first time. I didn't realize until I was an adult that I had all these challenges, because I was fortunate enough to be extremely determined, and I was able to rely on people to help me through it. And the parents that I work with, the typical statement of disbelief I hear from them is, "But he did so well in high school. What happened? How come he's struggling now?" Well, their parents routinely enlist my services after a satisfactory or sometimes stellar high school career, only to see their child completely implode on the college campus. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Let me explain why this happens. In the high school environment, a child with special needs such as ADHD or ASD, which means autism spectrum difference, like the one I described previously, succeed because they have the luxury of being a follower. With such an inflexible system of tight schedules and rules, all made up by somebody else, and your primary responsibility is just to do what you're told, this child has few, if any, problems to solve for 12 years of primary schooling. And if your child has an IEP, or an individual education plan, they were provided with assistance, likely without knowing what their challenges were, or even their diagnosis for that matter, and without having to routinely ask for help. The assistance was simply provided. The student also had high levels of accountability from their parents and teachers, who told them what was important to know, when the test would be, assignments were due, and they got on their kids' back if things weren't completed. At home, the parents tend to be very enabling. They mean well. They're not trying to cause difficulty for their child. They just want to help their child succeed. Sometimes they're very enabling just to keep the peace, because they don't want to see their kid act up, melt down, throw a fit. They just want peace and quiet. Having 3 kids like this, my own, I get it, trust me. So they do what they need to do to reduce their child's anxiety so that they can focus on their studies, because they want them to do good in school. Unfortunately, the catastrophic consequence of this is that the child is denied opportunities to learn problem solving in the areas that will be necessary when she goes off to college. They are instead protected by having their problems solved for them. So when they arrive at a typical mainstream college, they're often clueless as to what problems exist, what's waiting there for them, let alone how to prioritize them and solve them. What in college students and parents can expect, well, let me say that again. What parents and college students can expect are some of these things. The first one is that college staff expect students to be organized, self-starters with disciplined study habits and self-determination, and the only accountability comes from the student to him or herself. Some college professors are even known to start their classes by saying, "Okay, you're grown-ups now. This is all on you. I don't care if you come to class or not. Your grade's your responsibility." Another thing is that because of the rules and regs of colleges, student confidentiality often denies the parents access to their child's grades. So parents are unable to determine if any work is being completed by their child at all. Now, there are cases where the child can sign a form giving their parents access to their info to see if what their children claim they are doing is what they're actually doing. If your child goes away to school, they will now have to solve the problems that have been solved for them their entire life. They no longer have a parent getting them out of bed every morning. They now have classes where attendance isn't taken, where tests may be infrequent, or where writing a research paper is a main feature of success in that class, and that happens to be one of your child's biggest challenges. There are no doting, rescuing one-on-one aides, parents or teachers to sit with them and help them break down assignments into manageable chunks. All that goes away. You'd think they learn these things while receiving help in high school because other people are doing this for them, so they're observing it. But the fact of the matter is they weren't required to learn it because somebody else was always doing it. They were allowed to be followers, to be told what to do instead of learning to determine what was needed. They certainly didn't learn how to self-advocate that much because Others got to know them over a long period of time, could predict their needs, and step in and rescue. Not to mention that people typically met in closed rooms to determine what their problems were, what supports they receive, and the supports would just show up. So these students never learned how to identify and define their challenges. They didn't learn how to ask for assistance. Now the parents come to me and want to know what to do. Fortunately, it's never too late in my experience. A common story I hear is that a student in this situation is sent to college, then after first couple weeks ends up skipping classes, doesn't do classwork, and eventually isolates himself in his dorm room. It's no wonder that a person who has essentially had the staff telling them what to do and thinking for them a large part of the time, instead of teaching them how to think, is suddenly thrust into adulthood, completely unprepared, and doesn't know what to do with himself. Should your child experience this, my recommendation is to start over in community college. They'd be closer to home and in a better position to have your and maybe some staff members of the college's support in filling in the skill gaps that are the result of the often enabling experience of the public school system. Now, another question that I want to tap into a little bit here, and I receive a lot of requests about this, is parents not understanding why their kids can be so good at math and science, in fact, making it look easy, but then they shut down and pitch a fit over the notion of writing a paper. Well, this boils down to concrete versus abstract thinking. Our kids typically view the world through a concrete filter. They look for things that you can label as right or wrong, this or that, things you can measure. Math and science come ready-made with rules, strategies, categories, and other forms of structure your child doesn't have to create for themselves. So a child who is good in a subject where the structure is already provided may have disproportionate difficulty with the unstructured, abstract nature of essay writing. Make sense? Essay writing requires you to create something from nothing. She must decide on the beginning, the middle, the end, as well as the countless amount of data that connects everything, where to put it, what to leave out, what to prioritize, all the way to structure it, etc. She has to conceptualize, organize, prioritize, and execute all this without a roadmap, without a ready-made structure. And how, pray tell, does a concrete mind do that easily? It doesn't. When you think about it, people who have tremendous difficulty with this one skill, and listen closely to this, they will not typically choose a career path that requires it. So spending a lot of time with remediation, making them bone up and get a passing grade in a subject they really, really stink at, it's probably something that they already know, don't love, are not excited about, and will dump all that information the moment the class is over. So it makes more sense to focus in on their strengths and their passions and let them turn that into a career. The one accommodation I routinely recommend in order to get through classes like this, writing essays, is to construct an outline, a template that is composed of specific questions that need to be answered. Like, what was the main character's motivation? Or what were the main themes of this book? Then the information that is written down tends to come to our kiddos more easily when they're answering questions. This tends to work well for students who have difficulty initiating but can organize their thinking better when questions are asked. To let you in a little secret, I wrote my 5 books this way. I outlined with questions I wanted to answer, and the information came to me much more easily. Now, these students have spent their school time working so hard to appear to have no problems, working to avoid criticism, and having their problems solved for them. The students now find themselves being asked by me, sometimes for the first time ever, to explore the concepts of proactivity and self-determination. Stepping outside the safety net they've had their whole lives. And for some of these kids, this idea can be terrifying. Typically, the first hurdle to be overcome is the notion that problems exist to begin with. It's really easy to live in denial about life's problems if somebody else is always solving them for you. Because if someone is so protected that they seldom are allowed to experience their problems when they do, they can also lead to believe that they don't have any power to solve problems. That's somebody else's responsibility. They also can be led to believe that they don't cause problems either. It's always somebody else's fault. So believe it or not, this extra support can lead to a child that blames and feels helpless. So typically, I end up providing much guidance, if not more, to the parents in addition to the student. And help them really just collaborate with each other, because this is a massive paradigm shift for the parents as well as the student, and it takes some work and some serious collaboration. And once we teach the problem solving, the self-advocacy, the self-determined skills that are needed, that are going to need to take place for their entire lives, things can really begin to change for the better, especially when everybody works as a team. Now, I do want to make something very, very clear. I know there will always be schools and very gifted teachers who are the exception to all this. I share these ideas with you not to condemn anyone or any institution, but to point out that these things happen and can have very negative consequences for everyone. But when you're aware of them, you can stop them before they happen. Or if they do start, you can nip them in the bud. Then you can replace them with the opportunities your child needs to become a capable, confident member of their community. I hope this has been helpful. Please do me a favor. If you're watching the video, please share it. If you're listening to the audio, share that as well. You can leave a review on YouTube, on iTunes, or on my website, succeedwithadhdanyway.com. And if you enjoyed this, I hope you come back and join us for the next one as well. This has been another episode of Succeed with ADHD Anyway, and this is Brian King saying, thanks for being you.